بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الهزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue in our reading of the book Al-Sunna Al-Asha'ira. And as we mentioned, we are reading this book until Sunday, February the 21st, when we will begin our next text in the order of our reading, which is the explanation of the Creed of Islam, which is the Creed of Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi. That book is available at mmacbooks.com. And I'll put the link for you, inshallah ta'ala. This is the next book that we will be doing. I'll put it up, inshallah ta'ala. It is the Creed of Islam. And that book, we're probably going to be reading between 3 to 6 months. It may take for us to cover that book with the explanation and details, because we covered the book before in previous classes, but I'm going to go to the next level of explanation, inshallah ta'ala. And this is a different commentary among the commentaries upon that book. So we reached in the text that we're reading now, which is among the 25 books that we're supposed to be covering. Where is it? This is the text we're in now. I'm kidding. Al-Sunna, the Ash'aris. This is the book that we're reading. So those who are trying to follow what we're doing, these are recorded, so you can go back and look. This is the book we're reading. And we reach up to what page?
Page 21, the last sentence at the bottom.
So this is a quote from the great Hafiz Ibn Asakir in his book Tabyin al-Kadhib al-Muftari. Naam, go ahead. Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, he also said, and they, the Ash'aris, are strict in their adherence to the book and the Sunnah.
So remember yesterday we mentioned the name Ash'ari are those who follow the methodology of Al-Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, from which he extracted from the Quran, the Sunnah, the saying of the companions, and the followers of the companions, and the followers of the followers, the issues related to tenets of faith of Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. The work of Imam al-Ash'ari was a work of codifying and structuring the creed of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah in an organized methodology so that the people would know the belief of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is the belief of Islam. Al-Imam al-Ash'ari radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, likewise the case of Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, They did not formulate a creed from themselves. So this is a misunderstanding when people think, and it's work, for people to understand. And I think, and I'm saying to myself that we got to concentrate more on learning and understanding a subject before we differ about it. So before we differ about a subject, let us understand the subject. Let us understand the terminology. Let us understand what is being talked about. And then after we have an understanding, there is the possibility that we could differ. And that goes in any, aspect of learning. Learn what the subject matter is first. Understand what you're talking about before you even have a discussion about something in detail. In brief, at least know what you're talking about. So when we're talking about the Ash'ari school or the Maturidi school, learn those schools for what they are as they intended, right? Two important things. Learning what they are, number one. And when you learn what they are as they, meaning those two imams, intended, not what we impose on them from our side. No, what do you understand from your work? And make that a rule for yourself whenever you're acquiring, especially Islamic knowledge. You want to understand what the speaker or the writer is understanding from their side, not from what you're understanding. Because sometimes you can understand what the writer or the speaker does not intend. So you want to try to understand what they intend by their speech or by their writing. So when we're talking about the Ash'aris, in this case, or the Maturidis, we want to know what did they intend, right? So here, Al-Hafidh ibn Asakir, rahimahullah ta'ala, who was a great Hafidh in the 6th century, he said that Al-Ash'ira, they are the Ash'aris, they cling to Al-Kitab wa Sunnah, which is an indication of something, that the Ash'aris follow according to them, despite who may disagree with them. But according to the Ash'ira, the Ash'aris, they not only follow Quran and Sunnah, they are clinging to the book and the Sunnah. So the claim that, I take my knowledge from the Quran and the Sunnah would give someone the false perception that the Ash'aris don't follow the Quran and the Sunnah. In fact, it is the Ash'aris' core conviction that our methodology is built upon Al-Kitab wa Sunnah, the book and the Sunnah. Now, go ahead.
They shun the causes that lead to dissension. They are patient in their religion during times of affliction and trial, and they are victorious over their enemy without taking revenge or feuding. They do not abandon the Quran and the prophetic proofs, and they do not follow the way of the Mu'tazila deniers and Qadariyah in the rational sciences.
So he's saying they don't leave off sticking, right? They don't leave off sticking to the Quran and those proofs, evidences that reached us by way of narration from the Quran, from the statements of the Sahaba. And they don't follow the way of those who denied Allah's attributes, Al-Mu'attila and Al-Qadariyya, those who denied destiny or predestiny or Allah's divine decree, right? So they don't follow those ways. So for anyone who says that the Ash'aris deny Allah's attributes, from the side of the Ash'aris, this is not the case, right? So to equate al-Asha'ira with al-Mu'attila or al-Jahmiya, which were people who denied Allah's attributes. From the side of the Ash'aris, this is a false accusation. So from our side, we want to understand, well, if one is saying that the Ash'aris deny Allah's attributes and the Ash'aris say they don't, what do the Ash'aris understand by denial of Allah's attributes? And what do their opponents consider denial of Allah's attributes? I watched something yesterday, was interesting in relation to this point. One from the opponents of the Asha'ira, meaning this person, he was Salafi and a teacher. And he said that we don't do taqleed. We don't do a taqleed. For a question for you before we go on, what is a taqleed? That's a question. Because this one, he said, we don't do taqleed. Tell you. What is taqleed? I want to show you how superficial such a statement is, right? Taqleed is to follow qualified scholars. Okay. When he said a taqleed, what did he mean? Did he mean that? So it's true. A taqleed is to follow qualified scholars, right? Y'all are the funniest group of students and family and seekers of knowledge that I ever met. You cannot help but to love y'all. Isa, can I look at your paper? La ilaha illallah. Y'all too much. Subhanallah. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness. Oh, y'all are crazy. Tell you what they mean, blind following, right? That's what they meant. We say following qualified scholarship. What he meant, blind following. Now, that means you following somebody without knowing their proofs. That's the point. Tell you. So he said, we won't do taqleed. Is it possible that anyone in our time, anyone, I don't care who you are, is it possible, intellectually, logically possible, because we are people that have sound minds, that anyone in our time does not do taqleed? Is that possible? That we have in our time someone who does not do taqleed? So it's no, 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 no. Okay, no, why? Give me the simplest why. You said no, why? Why is that impossible? I just want us to think. Why is it impossible? Okay, how will we learn? What do you mean by that? All right. And this one, everyone follows someone. So if he says no taqleed, then that means we can't even follow Al-Bukhari or Muslim, right? If there is no taqleed, we cannot follow Bukhari or Muslim. If you say no taqleed, because Bukhari has a methodology by which he grades hadith and he grades men, right? So does Muslim. If we're not going to do taqleed, then we got to do it ourselves. We can't rely on what Bukhari said. We need to examine even the words of Bukhari and determine if we agree with him, right? Do you understand what I mean? And it's not sufficient to say, oh, all of the Muslims agreed that Bukhari's book of Sahih is Sahih. Okay, then you're doing taqleed of the majority of the Muslims. Because there were some people who didn't agree with Al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala. And the nation considered their disagreement as invalid. But there were Muslim top-ranked scholars who did not agree with Imam al-Bukhari. So if you're saying that you do no taqleed, that means we're not reading Sahih Bukhari and depending on his reading, not Sahih Muslim, not none of the 6 books. All of those things, we're not going to follow them. We're going to do the work ourselves. Do you understand why I say that statement is false? It doesn't hold weight? Because all of us, every Muslim, does some form of taqleed. We have to. Unless we're absolutely qualified to do all the research ourselves. And this is foolish, which no one with a sound mind would accept. Is this clear? So the issue is not, are we doing taqleed? Because all of us do taqleed. It is, who are we going to follow when we do taqleed? Is this point clear? Because everyone says, I follow Quran and Sunnah. No Muslim will say, I don't follow the Quran and the Sunnah. So that's not the question. The question is, are you accurately following the Quran and the Sunnah? And that is going to be determined by how you're following, who you're following, and is that understanding accepted? That's the question here, not the question of following. So this is like kind of erroneous wordplay. Yes, part of taqleed is when you follow Isnad, you have to, because that knowledge had to reach you from someone. And you're following that person who gave you that knowledge because you believe they're trustworthy. Someone else may say that person is not trustworthy, right? Right? And this is the natural process of seeking knowledge, that no one individual, and we need to learn that as a people, no one individual can claim revelation except Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Everyone else, they may be right, they may be wrong, and they're going to be put in the scale of trustworthiness, accuracy, and etc. Right? That's for everyone. So here, Ibn Asakir is mentioning that we don't negate Allah's attributes, and we don't follow these groups. So he mentioned groups for a reason. Why? Because there were people who claimed to be Muslim that had ideas that the Ash'ari believe were not consistent with the book and the Sunnah, such as Al-Qadariyah. Remember, this group Al-Qadariyah, they existed in the early days. They even during the time of the Sahaba, they existed. And in fact, the hadith of Jibreel, that well-known hadith, if you go back to the beginning of its narration, it is about those people who denied al-qadr. They denied the destiny of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, right? And they went to Abdullah ibn Umar and asked him about these people. And he related this hadith all the way back to his father of Hadith Jibril. So it came from the question originally that we talked about in that narration came from a question about Al-Qadariyah, right? So this is something that we should think about. They mentioned it. Why? Because they differed from the majority of the Muslims, but they themselves consider themselves Muslim and consider themselves following the Quran and the Sunnah. They believe that based on something they understood. So that goes back to my original point, was that whenever we learn, we want to know what the person who has that conviction understands, not what we impose on them, right? This is very important. I'm talking in terms of knowledge. And that's in terms of fairness when you're dealing with one another. I don't want to know what I think of you. I want to know what you think of yourself. And I need my understanding to coincide with your understanding about what you're saying, because you're the one saying it, right? I cannot impose my thoughts on you. Now, once I fully understand what you're saying, then I have the ability to disagree or agree. You follow what I mean by that? And that's the danger of blind following. What do I mean blind following? Meaning you don't listen to no one but the one you agree with. And you don't give anyone else a chance to have another opinion in order that you may either properly agree or disagree. You don't even know their opinion and you just disagree with them because of what you follow. This is blind following, and this is blameworthy. It's very important, right? And many people fall into this trap that they are, fanatics about their ideas, as if their idea is divine revelation. And this is a mistake. That doesn't mean you're not correct, but also you need to understand that there is the possibility that you could be incorrect. And the only way that possibility, right, in some issues will be known is when you're fair in your examination of things. Of course, the Quran was still being revealed during the time of this hadith. Naam, go ahead.
Rather, in matter of doctrine, they gather between revelatory evidence and rational proofs. They avoid the extremism of the Mu'tazila, eschew the ways of the deniers, and they repudiate the negligence of the anthropomorphist and corporealist.
So here he's showing that the Asharis and Ibn Asakir was a major, Al-Hafidh Ibn Asakir. Keep these terms. Al-Hafidh, we discuss what is the Hafidh, just to keep our review so we make sure we're following each other. What is Al-Hafidh? When we say Al-Hafidh Ibn Asakir, what does that title Al-Hafidh mean in a basic way? If we want to get the level of his knowledge, who's talking? Because when you say Al-Hafidh, you're talking as this person is an authority. So what does that title indicate? MashaAllah. And here's important. I'm giving you this because we live in a time of arrogance. Seriously. And people in their arrogance, they say, I'm not following nobody. I know y'all heard it. And this really comes from a segment of those who proclaim that they are Muslim. That I don't follow nobody. I only follow Quran and Sunnah. And it's extremely important that we understand concepts to know what's being said. So this one who says, I only follow Quran and Sunnah, we want to put him in the scale of the experts in the field, because that's a claim of expertise. If you're saying, I only follow Quran and Sunnah, then that means there's a lot involved in that. And if you're like that, then we should know that. And if you're not like that, that means you have to do taqleed. And now we're going to know who you're doing taqleed of, right? Because if you're claiming mastery, then mashallah, we got to examine your claim. We can't just automatically say, no, you're not like that. We don't know the unseen. I don't know what you've done. I don't know your memorization. I don't know your experience. I may think, but I don't know. So let's examine your claim of expertise, right? Reader.
Yes.
When someone wants to be a professional in any field and they want to claim expertise or mastery, don't they usually get examined and tested to see if they meet the qualifications of that field?
Yes, that is correct.
Would it ever be accepted in any professional field or career that a person makes claims of expertise or mastery and they're never tested?
They're always tested when making claims of expertise.
Okay, so it would be fair to say that anyone who says, I follow Quran and Sunnah and I'm able to go and do it myself, that claim needs to be examined, right? This is our private conversation, reader. No, it's important to understand this, right? So, with that being said, when we looked at Hafiz ibn Asakir, right? Hafiz ibn Asakir, that's a Hafiz. He's stating something, and he is an expert in the field that has been tested by his peers, and everyone who came after him agreed to his level in his field. So he's talking about the Ash'aris, and he said they join between, when it comes to the cases of belief, the proofs, textual evidence, al-adillatu sam'iyya, which is the textual proofs from the Quran and Sunnah, and barahin al-uqul, and intellectual evidences. And then he says, this is how we got our madhab of al-asha'ira, from transmitted texts from the Quran and Sunnah, and also rational evidence. When we combine them, this is how we arrive at the conclusions of the school of the Ash'aris. Then he makes some points. He says that we avoid, meaning the Ash'aris, they avoided the extreme of Al-Mu'tazila. Who are Al-Mu'tazila? We said we must understand the points that we're talking about. Al-Mu'tazila were a group that lived in the early Islamic times who preferred the intellect or ration over revelation, meaning they believed in revelation, but they said that the priority of deriving understandings, its foundational thing is al-aql, the intellect, ration, right? Though they did believe in the Quran, but they put the Quran and weighed it based on the intellect. Is this clear? Everyone understands that? So that was their main. So there, whenever you would read the works of the Al-Mu'tazila or someone who's Mu'tazili, you're going to find that he's going to rely more on the intellect than the transmitted text. Is this clear? So that's one extreme. So the Ash'ari say, no, we don't go to that extreme. And then there's another extreme, which they don't follow, is the ways of Al-Mu'attila. You got to get all these words. Al-Mu'attila are those who denied Allah's attributes, right? So they seen attributes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation and in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they negated them for various reasons, right? Among them was they didn't believe these were befitting to ascribe to the Creator. So they denied these attributes. So that's another extreme, complete denial or using the intellect over revelation. So he says the Ash'ira join between the transmitted text and the intellectual evidences. And then there is another extreme that they got away from, which was Al-Mujassima and Al-Mushabbiha. Al-Mujassima and Al-Mushabbiha. Right? What is this extreme? Al-Mujassima are those who ascribe to Allah attributes of bodies. Al-Mushabbiha are those who gave Allah attributes that resembled attributes of the creation. So the difference between Al-Mushabbiha and Al-Mujassima, they're similar, but there's a difference. The Mujassima, they attribute bodily appendages to Allah. And the Mushabbiha, they liken Allah to the creation by meaning. They may not give, say, a body or describe Allah by a body, but the meanings they give are meanings that only apply to created things. Right? Y'all follow this? Is this any question about these four groups that Al-Hafidh ibn Asakir mentioned that the Ash'aris distinguished themselves from? Al-Mu'tazila and Al-Qadariyya can fall in that. Al-Mu'attila, Al-Mujassima, and Al-Mushabbiha. The main difference between Al-Mu'tazila and Al-Mu'attila is the Mu'tazila were people that based most of their claims on Al-Aql, simple. And Al-Mu'attila, they were those who denied attributes of Allah because they felt that they were not befitting. So they were running away from at-tashbih, which is the way of the mushabbiha. So they went to denial, saying Allah is not attributed that. And you will find similarities in these groups. They have some similar things, but there are distinct differences from them and when you go into more detail. But they all share some similar ideas. The Mu'tazila, because of their ration, they did deny some of Allah's attributes, right? But they had a different approach than some who were just Mu'attila, not for the same reason of Al-Mu'tazila. And that's the same thing with Mujassima and Mushabbiha. They share some similarities, but they have some distinctive characteristics that the other one is not attributed with. That's when you go in more detail. It's not exactly the same context, but the same meaning can be understood, but just a different context. So that someone who claims to be Muslims, but they have some ideas that are not consistent with the majority of the Muslim nation. And there are degrees in that. Okay. All right, go ahead. So now when we say Ash'ari, now you'll get why the name becomes important, because they're distinguishing themselves from other methodologies that they believe is not consistent with what the Quran and the Sunnah. You follow? So the name Al-Ash'ari, and because you hear people say the Sahaba weren't Ash'aris. Of course, Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari was not alive. That's obvious. Just like the Sahaba weren't Shafi'is or Malikis or Hanafis or Hanbalis, those Imams were not alive. So it's nothing smart to say. It's obvious. What you're talking about is methodology, not names. Names are used to identify methodologies. So what is important? Was their methodology the methodology of the companions? That's the question, right? Not the name. The name is just distinguishing methodologies, right? So if one went to a certain school, the School of Law of Harvard is not exactly the same of the School of Law of Yale, by way of a taqrib, by bringing it close to us. So someone who studied law in Harvard is going to have a different methodology than a law student from Yale. And the law student from Yale and Harvard won't have the same methodology of a law student from Oxford. And they're going to, when they discuss law in more details, they're going to talk about the Oxford School of Law, or the Harvard School of Law, or the Yale School of Law, or the Cambridge School of Law, for instance, by way of making you understand. Even though the foundations of law are basically similar, the approach to them may differ from school to school. So what are you talking about here? You're talking about methodology. Is this clear? Are we clear? No? Any questions? You following me? I know it sometimes may seem like a lot, but I want you to understand. So then when you understand, you can have a more productive discussion when you discuss something, because you know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
With proofs, they expose the doctrines of the false sects. They reject the ways of the Jamia. They disdain the Karamiya and the Salamiya. They invalidate the beliefs of the Qadariya, and they reject the doubts of the Jabriya.
All right. When we discuss the creed of Islam coming up, we're going to talk about all these different groups: Al-Jahmiya, Al-Karamiya, Al-Salimiya, Al-Qadariya, Al-Jabriya, and many, 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 many other groups. These were factions. If I can get 1 second, I want to show you a book. I don't know if it's available in English. It may be. I'll tell you it. I don't know where to find it, but give me 1 second. Allah. This book, Al-Farqu Bayn al-Firaq, it was written by Al-Imam Abdul Qahir Ibn Tahir Ibn Muhammad al-Baghdadi. He died in the year 429. This book is called The Difference Between the Sects. Al-Farqu Bain al-Firaq. The differences or the difference between the sects. This book is the most famous book in talking about Muslim groups from the past, right? He died in the 5th century. So he was right a month after the teachers of the Salaf. The teachers of his teachers were the students or the students of the Salaf, right? He was right close, only 129 years after the time of the Salaf. This book, so for those who read Arabic, it is a text, but I think it's translated somewhere. I just don't know where. You might just have to look. By Imam al-Baghdadi, The Differences Between the Sects. And in this, he mentions, and this is the most thorough of all the books, at the end of the book, he mentions, after mentioning all these different groups and all these different branches, and he'll mention who are Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So when we talk about the Creed of At-Tahawi at the beginning and at the end, especially at the end, we'll go in more detail about all these different groups that Imam At-Tahawi mentioned. Now, go ahead.
Their doctrine is the most moderate of doctrines.
All right, 1 second. Let me put the book. Al-Farqu. So you know about it. Al-Farqu Bain al-Firaq. By Imam Abu Mansur al-Baghdadi. (429 age). So this is the book, Al-Farqu Bain al-Firaq, to talk about all those groups. So if someone wanted to do further research, this is an excellent text to learn about those groups and what were their beliefs and all that. He mentions all of that in that book, especially the early groups that were during the time of the Salaf and directly after the Salaf up to his time. Okay, so Al-Ash'ari, they are in the middle of all these extremes, right? So they have a balance between all these different extremes. Now, go ahead.
Their doctrine is the most moderate of doctrines. Their drinking source contains the sweetest drink.
So here, their doctrine, it means that what it really says, فَمَذْهَبُهُمْ, their school of thought. So doctrine, meaning their school of thought, is awsatul madhahib. It is the most balanced or in the middle of all the different schools of thought. So every school of thought is a methodology. So the Mushabbiha is like a school of thought in the Creed, Mujassima, Mu'tazila, Mu'attila, Jahmiya, Shia, all of these are madahib, right? Some are correct, some are incorrect, some have correct points, some have. Al-Sunna, Al-Ash'ari, Wal-Maturidiyya are a middle course between all of these madahib and extremes. Now, go ahead.
Their positions are the noblest of positions, and their ranks are the greatest of ranks. The insult of a detractor has no effect upon them, and the injury of an injurious person leaves no mark upon them.
And here is something I want you to think about. I want you to think about. Who's the speaker here? That's the question. Who's the speaker here what we just read? Who is saying this? Let me see if you check your notes. Who's the speaker here? Hmm? I don't know. Check your notes. We are writing notes, right? Okay. Hafid ibn Asakir, the author of the book. Come on, y'all. We're gonna pick it up. Seriously. This is important. We read the statement of Ibn Sirin. He said, "Inna hadha al-ilm din, fanzuru amman ta'khuduna dinakum." Verily, this religion you're learning is the religion. So look well to whom you take your religion. So Ibn Asakir, when did Ibn Asakir die? In what year? And what century? Let's say that. He was from what century? What century? I told you. Hmm? It's in your notes. You should be writing notes. You should have it. Come on, help me out here. What century he died? Mm, mm-mm. What century? No, not 8th century. No. He was way before the 8th century. Someone help out. Come on. Not 5th century. 6th century. Good, Muhammad Abdul Malik Shabazz. 6th century. No, I said Ibn Asakir, the one who's making this statement. No, we're talking about Ibn Asakir. Tayyib, what was his most famous book that he's well known for? Ibn Asakir, Al-Hafidh Ibn Asakir. Right, he died 571, Malika, right. So he's 6th century. What was he famous for? His most famous book? He has many books, but what is the most famous one? I told you yesterday. And I told you how many volumes it was. Tariq Dimashq. How many volumes, Free Slave? 79. Good. Tell you. Okay. So I'm just giving you the rank of Al-Hafiz Ibn Asakir, right? So we know who we're talking about, who was Ash'ari, who followed the Ash'ari school, and this is his position. So that's not anybody saying this. This is a master of hadith, one of the foremost scholars of his time. Ibn Asakir died 571. Ibn Asakir. There are different Ibn Asakirs. Don't mix them up. Ibn Asakir here, Al-Hafiz Abu Qasim Ibn Asakir, is not Fakhruddin Ibn Asakir. Don't mix them up. They're two different people. So some of you would think that Ibn Asakir, because you learned a creed of Aqidah to Ibn Asakir, that's not Ibn Asakir the Hafiz. That's another Ibn Asakir. So that is Fakhruddin Ibn Asakir. There is Abu Qasim Ibn Asakir, the famous Hafiz. He died 571. Okay, good. But the point is, so he was in his time a famous, and among the most famous scholars of hadith. And he was a hafiz, and he had so many narrations. So this was his position, he said about the Ash'aris. Tayyib. The next one, go ahead.
Imam al-Murtada al-Zabidi.
So when we mentioned yesterday, so far we read two great Hufaz who were Ash'ari, who mentioned the Ash'ari school. We mentioned three of them actually. Two of them from their books, and one he was quoted. Who were the three scholars that were mentioned in this text that were all Hufaz, and they all mentioned the rank and status of the Ash'ari school in what we just read yesterday and today? And went under this chapter, there were three main scholars that were mentioned. All of them were Hufaz. They were all over 100,000 hadith with their chains. Who were they? There were three. There's only three of them that we mentioned here that were quoted so far. Who are they? Tajuddin as-Subki. And when did he die? In what century? Just give me the century. You don't need the date. And Izz-ad-Din ibn Salam, so that can make four, right? 771. Izz-ad-Din ibn Abdussalam, Sultan al-Ulama, right? He died in the 7th century, okay? Al-Hafid al-Bayhaqi, and he died in the 5th century. So that's three. One more, because Izz-ad-Din was quoted as well. One more that we mentioned so far. We just mentioned him. Hafid ibn Asakir. So we got four of these great scholars. Since we are doing taqleed, follow what I'm saying. We're all doing taqleed. And if we're going to say, who are you following in your claim that the Ash'aris are upon the Quran and the Sunnah? We're following the likes of Tajuddin as-Subki, Al-Hafid, Sheikh Izz-ad-Din ibn Abdussalam, Sultan al-Ulama, the leader of the scholars of his time, Al-Hafid al-Bayhaqi, Al-Hafid ibn Asakir. All of these Hufaz, they are at this rank, right? They're at this rank of knowledge in hadith. So obviously you know what they are with Quran. If the Quran is first, so they mastered that. They are in hadith now, and they are master memorizers in Aqidah. This is their creed. They were Ash'aris. This is their writings. This is what they said, right? So since we're into this taqleed business, we're talking about experts in the field. This is what they said. We're not experts, right? And since we don't know, Allah told us in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. So now whoever you tell me to follow and their approach, we're going to put them in the scale with these giants. We're going to put them in the same scale. We're going to weigh their ranks with the ranks of these giants. Do y'all see where I'm going with this? We're just going to use our minds. The problem is when we don't know, it's easy to tell us anything. When we don't know, we don't have resources, right? But now what we want to do is elevate the level of our understanding and then give us what everyone else, unfortunately, the majority of people have been hiding from us. Because if they're people of knowledge, they know these things. This is not something that is unique to an individual. This is our history. These are our scholars. Their books are well known. Everyone uses them. So why didn't you tell us that this was their position. And let us evaluate these claims. Right? This is a big, big point here. Let us evaluate the claims. Be fair. Put it all on the table. Let us judge, since we're playing mujtahid, right? Let us judge fairly, right? It's very, so these are who said it. Now we're going to go to the next Hafiz, right? He's a Hafiz. The next one who's going to be quoted. Go ahead.
Imam al-Murtada al-Zabidi.
Al-Murtada
Murtada
al-Zabidi.
Al-Zabidi. Excuse me.
So write the name, and you can put Al-Hafiz Murtada al-Zabidi. Al-Murtada al-Zabidi, he was a Hafiz. That means Hafiz, he had over 100,000 chains of narration. 100,000 hadith with their chains of narration. And believe me, they knew more than that. That was just, we're given a bar. They were more than that. They were way above that, right? Al-Hafiz Murtada al-Zabidi, he died in the year 1205 after Hijrah. So he was in the beginning of the 13th century. He died, and he was in Egypt. He was the high-ranking Hafiz of his time. In all of Egypt, there were none at the rank of Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada Al-Zabidi. In fact, he's known as, let me show you his rank, not only in hadith, he's known as Khatam al-Lughawiyin. He's known as the seal of the Arabic linguists. What does this mean? That means there was no one who came after him and reached his rank in the Arabic language. So we're not even talking about someone who's just a faqih, a scholar of fiqh. He was Hanafi. He was a faqih. He was a hafiz of hadith, high-ranking hafiz. And not only that, he was a musnad, meaning all of the chains of narration in our religion, all of them went through the route of Al-Murtada Al-Zabidi. Why? Because he was in Egypt, Azhar area, which was the center of Islamic learning in that time. So all of the asanid, anyone who has the chains of narration, their chains, among their chains, and the most authentic of their chains and reliable of their chains, go through the route of Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada Al-Zabidi. And if you in this field of a chains of narration and knowing asanid and knowledge, anyone who's in this field knows the rank of Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada Al-Zabidi, and they're honored to have a chain of narration through his route. So it's in the book, Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada Al-Zabidi. Died 1205 AH after Hijrah. Right? Anyone who's, so any of them, so all of these people who say, I got a sanid, right? And those people who differ, we got chains of narration. Show me all of your chains of narration that you say are trustworthy and high ranking to all the books of hadith, to whatever you want to go. And if you examine all of their chains of narration, you're going to see in their chains of narration the name Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada Al-Zabidi. In their chains of, so you have chains of narration. When you see them, you're going to see his name, right? because he was the musnid of his time. And to the point that he said this about himself: there is no chain or book or no scholar or no book on the face of the earth except that I have a chain of narration to it. Subhanallah. Now, what kind of statement is that? You heard what he said? Al-Hafidh Murtada al-Zabidi. He reached the level in his memorization and his expertise in the Islamic sciences. He said there is not a scholar or a book, meaning Islamic scholar or an Islamic book, on the face of the earth except that I have a chain to it. Subhanallah. Now, how many of us can say that? Do you know anyone who can say that except by way of taqleed of somebody like him? Subhanallah. Our religion is protected when you think about it. MashaAllah. Right? No one can play games with us. Right? You only can play games when we don't know. If you look into the statement of Al-Hafidh Al-Murtada al-Zabidi, he said there's no scholar or book on the face of the earth, and this was in the beginning of the 13th century, right? He said, except that I have a chain of narration to it. Now my question reverses: is there anyone on the face of the earth who can say that except by having taqleed of people like him? And the answer is no. The answer is no. That's a scholar. That is a scholar. You want to define alim, al-alama, that's it right there. Hafidh, that's it right there. That's our religion. But and so I'm going to show you the most famous books in Islamic history that we use in different sciences. He has a portion in them. In the Arabic language, I told you he's known as the seal of the Arabic linguist. The famous Arabic dictionary, Al-Qamus, he has, which was one volume, he has a 20-something, 20 more than 20 volumes, 26, 27 volume commentary that he wrote just in Arabic language on the dictionary. So if you want an encyclopedia of Arabic and you want to talk Arabic, you're going to go to his book. You're going to go to his book. Not only that, the most famous explanation of the Ihya of Ulumuddin, and the really only one we really rely upon and know about, is written by Al-Hafidh Murtada al-Zabidi. It's called Ithaf al-Sadat al-Muttaqeen Bishar Ihya Ulumuddin. So everyone who studies the Ihya of Imam al-Ghazali, when they want to know the meanings of the Ihya, they have recourse to the book of Al-Hafidh Al-Murtada al-Zabidi. I'm just giving you his rank. And he's in Egypt, and in the environment of Azhar in that time. And he was the master scholar. Look what he said. Go ahead. Oh, I'm over time. I'm sorry. Wow, time flies. Okay, let's just finish this quote of Murtada al-Zabidi, then we stop.
It should be known that neither Imam Abu al-Hasan nor Abu al-Mansur may
So Abu Hassan is Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari. Abu Mansur is Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, the Imam of the Ash'ariyah or the Ash'aris. Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, the Imam of the Maturidiyah. And these are known as Imama Al-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Go ahead.
May Allah Ta'ala be pleased with them and reward them with good on behalf of Islam. Innovated an opinion from their own selves or derived a distinct doctrine. They only confirmed the doctrines of the Salaf and defended the way of the companions of Allah Ta'ala's messenger.
Now here's who's saying this about them. This great Hafiz, this great Arabic linguist who was the seal of the linguist, this great scholar in spirituality, this great scholar in fiqh, the leader of the scholars of the most academic and intellectual environment on the face of the earth in his time, which was Azhar, Egypt in those days. These were the amazing scholars in Azhar, not like today. In those days, an Azhari meant a whole lot. Like he's Azhari, not like today where they're just graduating kids for numbers. I'm talking about when you were an Azhari in those days, you were among the biggest scholars on the face of the earth in all religious sciences. Not a few, you were a master. When you were from Azhar in those days, your memory books were memorized in those days. There was no such thing as just you take tests. No, your test was your memorization. And they would memorize books in every single science, sometimes 12, sometimes 20 sciences of the religion. They had mastery in them. And when they would be tested by groups of master scholars, all of them who had memorized, and they would examine them from memory. These were giants in those days. So he said, what did he say? They didn't come up with a madhab of themselves. Rather, they followed the madhahib, the schools of the Salaf. It wasn't just one way of the Salaf. And here is something that you need to think about. Read that line again before the Salaf. What does he say? They did what?
They only confirmed doctrines of the Salaf and defended the way.
Doctrines, madahib, that's the Arabic word, so you can see. Because sometimes the translations can be, right? Where are we at? There. Right? You see this? I'll move over. It says, I'm sorry, move over. Come on, move your fingers this way. Right there. Li madhahib is salaf, right? More than one school, not just one, madhahib as salaf. So doctrines meaning schools of thought among the salaf. So here's one of the things that is a false perception that our Wahhabi friends like to say, or so-called Salafi, I follow the way of the Salaf, as if the Salaf was only one type of approach. And that's not real. That's why he mentioned them, Al-Hafidh Murtada al-Zabidi, as Madahibu Salaf. The Salaf wasn't just one approach to things. There were multiple methodologies of dealing with things among the Salaf. So when you say, I follow the Salaf, which one among the Salaf do you follow? And what about the other positions of the Salaf? And how do you reconcile between the differences? It's not just play games and quote and no, don't work that way. What did he say? Madhahibu Salaf. So in order you say the Salaf, that's assumption that you know all their madhahib and you know what they said and their differences and what they agreed upon. You know all that stuff. And if you don't independently, you're making taqleed of somebody. And if you're making taqleed of somebody, is that person's deductions agreed upon by others? You see my point? So when we're talking about the Ash'aris, they did that. And we're saying we're making taqleed of the Ash'a'ira, right? But among the Ash'aris are Imam Ash'ari. And we just mentioned here, Imam in time sequence. Imam al-Bayhaqi, al-Hafidh al-Bayhaqi. Al-Hafidh is Ibn ad-Salam, Sultan al-Ulama. Al-Hafidh Tajuddin al-Subki. Al-Hafidh al-Murtada al-Zabidi. If we're going to do taqleed, these are the people we're following who follow the Imam al-Ash'ari and the great scholars of that school, that methodology, whom they said represented the book and the Sunnah and the methodology of the Prophet and the companions and the different madahib of the Salaf. That's what they said, and they were experts. That's who we're following, because we must follow. We agreed with that. Now, who's the ranks of what you're following to claim that it's correct? And then we examine from there. Go ahead.
Both of them debated with the people of blameworthy innovation and misguidance until the innovators were cut down and fled in defeat.
He said, so they did have discussions with the innovators and people of misguidance. So they did, those great scholars among the Salaf, among the companions and the Salaf and those who came after, they had discussions with innovators and people of misguidance. Now, remind you, those people of innovation and misguidance, they claim to be Muslims. And those among the Salaf just refuted their claims that it's not consistent. So from our side, we have to distinguish between what is right and wrong. So not everyone who claims Islam is following Islam properly. And our job is to distinguishing what is right and what is wrong, right? As was the job of the previous people before us, including the scholars among them. Now, the last line.
These are the Asharis, the followers of Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ashari. So who then was this illustrious Imam?
So we're going to stop now. But I wanted to show you something. We'll stop here. I want you to think about something. And I'm just laying foundations, right? So if this is Imam al-Ashari, so don't make it seem like some common, y'all, we're Asharis. We're nobody. We're common people. So for us saying Ashari, that doesn't hold a lot of weight. I'm an Ashari. Okay. Man anta. Who are you? Nobody, right? I'm nobody. But now when we're talking about Imam al-Ashari, and we're talking, I want to show you something, because if you learn these things, no one's going to be able to just tell you nonsense, right? Because honestly, a lot of these claims that are being made are nonsensical. We just can't see it. It doesn't make any sense with a person with an ounce of intellect who hasn't been manipulated. Because when you're manipulated, then you don't even think. You just, you just follow. You don't think at all. So that doesn't mean you don't have intellect. You just haven't used it, right? And you're just following. You're really blind following, because your intellect, if you use it, would wipe that out quickly. Now listen, so that we say I'm Ash'ari, that doesn't mean anything. Imam Amin is an Ash'ari. So who's he? Nobody, right? Nobody. And that's just real. He's no expert. He doesn't have any major fields of study. He's not an authority in any field. So he's nobody, right? So now, from where is he getting his following the Ash'ari from? Because he himself, he don't count. We're not going to take a third grader or a second grader, or in reality, a kindergartner or a preschooler, and then have him talk about what is going on the graduate level in college or in the university at graduate level. It's not like he don't count. It's not in the discussion. So we got to talk about people in the graduate level, right? We got to talk about those people. And for us, since we're talking about Quran and Sunnah, and we are Ahlul Hadith, people of Hadith, we're talking about all Hufav. We're talking about all Hufav. And we mentioned them explicitly in their books. So we'll talk about, and I'll repeat them, that were just mentioned in that little chapter. And we're going to learn many more. So we're taking it slow. Write these names down. Write the dates down. And we're going to be talking about them, reading biographies. It's very important. So we talked about, in way of order, Al-Hafidh al-Bayhaqi, 5th century. Al-Sheikh Sultan al-Ulama is Ibn Abd al-Salam, 7th century. Tajuddin al-Subki, 8th century. Al-Hafidh Tajuddin al-Subki, 8th century. Al-Hafidh Ibn Asakir, 6th century. Al-Hafidh Murtada al-Zabidi, the beginning of the 13th century. So we're talking about Hufav. These were masters in the field. They memorized narrations of hadith with chains of narration, right? And they are authorities who everyone came after them to this day rely on their books. They were that kind of authority. Not just anybody. Everybody who came after them to our day now rely on their books. That's something deep to think about it. Everyone who came after them rely on their books, right? If you're going to study hadith, you go, and a serious student of hadith, you're going to read the books of Al-Bayhaqi, Sunan al-Kubra, Sunan al-Sugra, Ma'rifat al-Sunan wal-Athar. You're going to read those books. If you're serious about if you're serious about history, and you want to know the history of the Muslim lands, especially Asham, which the Prophet praised, you're going to have recourse to Tariq al-Dimashq, the history of Damascus, written by Al-Hafiz ibn Asakir. You're going to read his book. If you're serious about learning the history of the Muslim nation, that's going to be in your library. You got to study it, right? Or you're not serious having a discussion. That's Hafiz ibn Asakir. If you're going to talk about usul al-fiqh, or the objectives of the sacred law, you're going to read Al-Qawaid al-Kubra by Sultan al-Ulama is Ibn Abd Salam. If you're a serious student, his book is going to be in your studies. Al-Qawaid al-Kubra by Is Ibn Abd Salam, Sultan al-Ulama. It's going to be in your curriculum. If you're going to So that's Sultan Ibn. If you're going to study the history of Al-Madahib and the history of school, the Shafi'i school, and you're serious about learning what was these great scholars, Tabaqat al-Shafiyyat al-Kubra by Tajuddin al-Subki, you're going to read it. It's a must. You can't go through it if you're a serious Shafi'i, talking about you know about the school of Shafi'i, and you want to know about the school of those early scholars and their histories. That's a book you got to read. So Tajuddin al-Subki is going to be in your library. If we want to go to Arabic language, right? You're going to read the Sharh of Al-Qumus, Taj al-Arus by Al-Murtada, Al-Hafiz al-Murtada al-Zabidi. If you're serious about Arabic language, that got to be in your library. If you're serious about knowing the meanings of the Arabic language and words and what is understood from how the scholars understood it and all that with a chain of narration, you got to read that book. It's a must. If you're serious expert in the field, you're going to read that book. If you want to learn about spirituality and you're serious about traveling the path to Allah, you're going to have reading the book of Ihya Ulumuddin for sure. The book of Imam Ghazali is a must-have in the field of spirituality. And if you're going to know the meanings of that, is a must that you read the book Ithaf al-Sadat al-Muttaqeen bi Sharh Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada al-Zabidi. If you're serious about chains of narration and knowing routes of hadith and how we got our religion to us today, and you're going to study Asanid, you're definitely going to learn about Al-Hafiz Al-Murtada al-Zabidi and the narrations of chain from Egypt and all around the world. Even if you're studying this field, you can't study the field of hadith and chains of narration from our time back to Al-Bukhari and Muslim without investigating and looking at the work of Al-Hafiz Murtada al-Zabidi. If you're serious, any serious student of Islam know exactly what I'm saying is all facts with capital letters. If you're a serious student. Other than that, you're playing games. You're not a serious student, you're a joker. Pretending. We're talking about serious students that are serious. This is scholarship. And all of what I mentioned were Ash'aris and defended and supported and spread the Ash'ari school. I want us to think about these things. This is when we're going to raise. So now we have a scale. That's who we're following. These are the lights. And we're going to learn many, many more. So I need you to master these scholars. Master them. And I'm going to give you chains of narration to them. We're going to step this thing up. Just to show why we say we're Ash'ari. Why we say we're Maturidi. And then we want the others to do the same. Those who oppose the idea do the same. Produce the same results. And then we're going to collect that information. We don't got to have any debate. You do it, we'll do it, and we'll put it all together, and then we'll see what people think, right? Just put your position out there, right? And then we'll say what makes sense for us as a people to follow. What makes sense? When I look at this overwhelming amount of evidence, amount of expertise, amount of scholarship, amount of memorization, amount of connection, the level of scholars, to me is a no-brainer. But maybe the other, they see something I don't see. And I really don't see. Because if all of these great experts didn't know what to believe, they were all corrupt in tenets of faith, then the whole nation of Muhammad got a problem. All the Muslims got a problem, not just them. Why? Because all the Muslims rely on their works. And all of us, if we believe that they were all misguided and they didn't have the correct creed and they needed to be corrected, then we got our religion from a bunch of deviants. Think about that. Think about that statement. That if they were all mistaken in Aqidah, they didn't know what to believe, they diverged from the way of the Sahaba and the Prophet and the Salaf, and they were the best we had in Islamic knowledge. We rely on all of their works. Does that make sense to anybody? Like, really? I mean, just forget where you feel at from your fanaticism. Let's put all that aside. Does that make any sense? That claim, does it make any sense? What does it say about us as a nation? I mean, that's a question, and I'll stop. But I want, logically, does that make any sense to anyone? I mean, I think about this all the time. And when I think about our people, they did a number on us, man. Seriously. They did a number on us. And you know what? I refuse to debate, and I thought about it, with anyone. It's a waste of time. Let's talk and let's investigate and stop talking about me and you. Right? Stop talking about ourselves. That's been our problem. Everyone want to exalt themselves. Like, I got to be the man. Forget you. You ain't at that level, and neither am I. Let's go look at our history. Let's look at our scholarship. All the books let's go through our libraries. Let's pull out these books in our libraries and see what we're saying. Because you'll watch a person, he got a big old library behind him. Y'all saw those, right? Right? You see the guy who makes a video and he got all these books behind him, big volumes and all that. Y'all see those videos? There's a bunch of books behind them, right? How many of you have seen that? Subhanallah, right? Y'all seen those videos? I see a lot of them all around the world. That means I'm scholarly. I got all these books behind me. You see me? I'm the man's, right? No, seriously. Have you ever said to yourself, when you see all those books, right? When you see all those books, because it'd be nice, it looks nice, and colors, got the big names and some of their volumes, because the Arabs, they're good with that. They make a book, then they put the bindings together, and the bindings spell the name of the book. Don't that stuff look nice? It's pretty, right? It's very pretty. Nice background, look real good, right? Did you ever ask yourself, when you're looking at those pretty books, who wrote those books? What are they about? What was the background of those scholars? Did you ever ask yourself that? Did you, I mean, really, while you were looking at that, did you ever ask what is in all those books? Who wrote them? From how did that person learn them? Where did it reach him? What's his chain of narration to those books? Did you ever ask yourself that? Seriously. I do all the time, right? And when you go look at those books, say, all right, I need you to move over for a minute, right? I need you to stop the lecture. I need you to move over. Let's look at that beautiful, because obviously what that library behind you is telling us, the viewer, that you got some stuff. That's your evidence behind you. That's your mountains, right? That's your knowledge. Okay, so why don't you get out the way and let me see what's behind you, and let me see where you're getting your knowledge from. And when you go examine those books, you're going to see a lot of those books were the scholars we're talking about, and most of them were Asharis. And when you study the chain from that person to those books, you're going to find that most of the scholars were Ashari or Maturidi, right? When you really get it, right, you go look. Say, now I'm going to ask you a question. You got all these books. We just moved you out the way. Now we bring you back. And we say, Habibi, can I ask you a question? You're telling me to follow opposite of what you have in your books behind you. Why? Why you got them if they all misguided? And they're not trustworthy in belief. And they're people of bid'ah and dalala. Misguidance. Why you got all those books? For what? They're misguided people. They don't even know how to believe in Allah correctly. They deny Allah's attributes. Why you got all those books? Explain. It doesn't make sense. Where are your scholars who agree with you that have no connection to them? Where are they at? So you should have a background with all that stuff. Without that, I mean, I'm just logic. I'm just thinking. Do you follow? You follow where I'm going with that? You follow where I'm going? We got to stop letting people pull the wool over our eyes. The gig is up. You're going to be honest with us and fair with us. We're not going to take this sitting down anymore, right? No more. And guess what? We want to learn. These are legitimate questions. It's nothing to debate about. Legitimate answer. So inshallah, we'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala sayyid. So please, all these names I mentioned, go back to the video, write them down, look it up. Don't just listen to me. You know, I want you to know what I'm saying well, because I'm going to build on it a lot. And I'm going to give you things that's going to help you investigate properly. You make your own decision after, use your intellect, have the information in front of you, weigh it out, and just say, MashaAllah, let me look. I'm just going to arm you with the tools. And I have them. Those books, they're here. I have them. So I'm not telling you something. Look, I'm not going on Google. Tabaqat al-Shafiyatul Kubra, Tajuddin al-Subki, right? Ithaf al-Sadat al-Muttaqin, Al-Murtada al-Zabidi. And the other books, these are the books that we were referred to in this thing. These are volumes. So this is just volume 2 of the books, because I was talking about Imam al-Ash'ari, right? And the books are here. So we're not looking. And here, if you look, Kitab al-Sadat al-Muttaqin is the book 1. Let me see my glasses. Look at this. This is Murtada Zabidi. So you won't think that even the book is, this is another book. That's the book we're reading, the Ash'ari book, where we were quoting from, right? That y'all got the English translation is up there. The English book is up on the screen. This is the Arabic version of the book. So maybe the author, he was misquoting, right? So we're going to go check. He said this is where he got it from. So we're going to go check. Here's the original book, Kitab Sadati Muttaqin. He mentioned, and this is volume 2. He mentioned on page number 8, the second chapter, right here, the second chapter. He said, إذا أطلق أهل السنة والجماعة فالمراد بهم الأشاعرة والماتريدية. He said, whenever it is said أهل السنة والجماعة, the people of the Sunnah والجماعة, فالمراد, so what is meant by that is الأشاعرة والماتريدية, right? إذا أطلق أهل السنة والجماعة فالمراد بهم الأشاعرة والماتريدية. He said that, right? That's Murtada Zabidi, Al-Hafiz, the Musnad, the author of the commentary on the biggest Arabic dictionary that we have, the explainer, and there's the book. He said it. We're following people like that. Here's the book. Hey, listen. We're فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I don't know. I'm asking the people of knowledge. These are the people of knowledge who conveyed our religion. That's what they said. Now you're telling me something different. I know their rank. What's yours? I know the rank of them. I know their books. I know what they said. These are scholars, and I know their writings. And it's not something that we got to talk about. Here's the book. Here's the books. Here's the books. Here's the books. Maybe the problem is I don't know how to read. Okay, you do. Please explain. You follow my point? We don't got to be personal, right? It never got to be personal. What I want to do is to get to the bottom of it so we can learn properly and use this beautiful deen of Islam to help future generations. This is what we got to do. And if we can plant the seed that one day grows into a beautiful tree to produce fruit, let's plant the seed. But plant the seed, we got to do what first? Before we put our seed in the earth, what we got to do? We got to clear the soil, get rid of the weeds. We got to do all that. That's the process we're at right now. Cleaning up the earth, making the soil fertile so we can plant the seeds so they can grow. You can't put seeds in rubbish. You got to clean the rubbish out first. And that is ignorance. Rubbish is al-jahlu bid-deen, ignorance of the religion. And trust me, for us, people have been deluding us for their own benefit far too long. And it doesn't just apply to Wahhabis and Salafis, even so-called Sunnis with the correct knowledge, when it comes to us, they've been shortchanging us. And all you got to do is listen to this one lecture and then go examine all what we've mentioned and realize, have our teachers instructed us in these things? Why am I just learning these things? Why don't I already know it and articulating it well? Somebody been shortchanging us. Let's fix that so that all of us together to our capacity can articulate these matters from the top of our head and have access to teach their children in future generations. وَأَقُولُ قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ. I say this last statement of mine, and I ask Allah to forgive myself and you. Inshallah, at 10 o'clock, today is Sunday. No, sorry. 4 o'clock, 4:15, Sheikh Walid Al-Rifai will be having his session in Al-Wasaya, which is advices. So if you tune in at 4:15, Sheikh Walid Al-Rifai will be going with his lessons in spiritual advices. Barakallahu fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.